Hi, what we're going to do now is we're going to show some essential pastry skills. What we're going to do is make some sweet pastry and go through the techniques and more importantly why things are done when making pastry. Our ingredients, we have got 200 grams of soft flour, we've got 125 grams of unsalted butter, we've got 50 grams of caster sugar and 1 egg. The first thing I always do is I break my egg and let that dissolve with the sugar. And that just gives it, while we're rubbing the butter into the flour, it just gives the sugar a chance to dissolve in the egg. The next thing is that we want to sieve the flour. When we do that for a couple of different reasons. The first reason is to get rid of the lumps. Secondly, we're just making sure that there's no foreign objects within the flour, because sometimes you can get little bits of packaging and things like that. And thirdly, you would sometimes sieve flour to aerate. We don't really need it aerated for this particular recipe, but it's good for adding lots of air. With the butter, I've diced it up really small, as you know, and the smaller the better. And it's cold, it's straight out the fridge. So again, you don't want to be making pastry with soft butter. So we're just going to add the butter to the flour. And then what I do is just sugar the flour and make sure it's completely coated and the butter's completely coated. We then get our fingers in, and this is quite important. Our fingers go in and reach the bottom of the bowl, and we're just very lightly rubbing the fat into the flour, but we're allowing gravity to let it go. One of the big dangers of pastry making is overworking, and this is the stage here that I believe that many people make that mistake. So we're just going to rub that in. And you're just rubbing it between your fingers and just letting it fall. Every now and again, give the bowl a little shake and it brings the bigger lumps to the top. And it just takes a couple of minutes. It's actually much quicker than you would think. And I always think that making pastry by hand is much better as well. It's very, very easy to overwork in a machine. So again, you can see the butter starting to work through. You can see the flour ever so slightly changing colour. It's starting to go a nice little yellow tinge to it. And again, it's important that that butter is straight from the fridge. And the other real important thing is you don't actually have to rub all the butter in. You really need to see that butter. When you're rolling the pastry out, a sign of a really good pastry is you can see little flecks of the butter still through it. And that shows that you haven't overworked the butter. So I think we're almost there. You can still see some lumps, and that's not really a problem at all. But you can see it's more the colour that we're actually looking for, that we've got, you know, a nice even yellowy colour. We've still got some lumps with the butter. So our next task is to add the sugar and the egg. So I'm just going to add the whole lot in. What we want to try and avoid at this stage is actually putting your hands back in there, because the egg will coat your fingers, then your fingers get coated in the mix and you end up with these horrible pastry gloves, which is never nice. So just use your spoon and a little sugar and just incorporate as much of that liquid in as you can before you put your hands in. And again, a lot of, chefs on TV will pour this mix out onto the table, and fundamentally for me that's just making a mess. Just keep it in the bowl. So the next thing we want to do is we actually want to make a kind of spider with our hands, and we just want to bring that mixture together. It'll come together quite quick. And then you gradually work with the back of your hand to bring it together. It actually takes quite a bit of pressure just to pull that pastry together. And again, because we didn't rub in all the fat, we've got a little window here that we can just make sure that the pastry is nice and even. Making sure the bowl's nice and clean. We can then pop it onto the table and just work that pastry through. And you can still see that there's nice flecks of butter through the pastry. So that's our pastry made, but we can't use it at the moment. What we've got to do now is rest it. And the reason for resting is it just lets things settle. Anything that you do with flour really needs rested and performs much better after it's had about half an hour in the fridge. But what I think, you know, you often see pastry in a fridge in a big ball, and then when you come out you have to beat it to death with a rolling pin. If you press it nice and flat and then wrap it, when you bring it out the fridge you can work with it straight away. So take some cling film, wrap your pastry in the film, pop your name on it so you get yours back, and that's our pastry made. So we've given our pastry half an hour in the fridge, so it's nice and firm, but because we put it in the fridge flat, it actually rests quicker, and then you can use it quicker. So we'll leave that there just for now. So we're going to line this fluted loose base tartlet case. There's a couple of different ways that we can do this. We're going to line it. There's two ways of holding it down. We have to bake it blind. So to bake it blind, you would then have to have some sort of medium to hold that down. We're going to be using our bacon beans, which is some red lentils, just with a bit of weight in them. You can use various things like rice, or you can buy special little balls that do the same job. I'm going to show you two different ways that I use. One is with greaseproof paper, where we make what's called a cartouche. So it's fundamentally just a round piece of greaseproof paper. So we've got half a sheet here. We're going to fold that in half, and we're going to fold it in half again. And what you then find is you've got two closed edges and two open edges. What we want to do is to put our finger on the point between the two closed edges and fold them so it looks like an aeroplane almost. If you can do aeroplanes, you can do this. I'm going to fold that again and again, and then we take the greaseproof and we just measure it against the tartlets. We've got to imagine that we've got to give that a little bit of room, you know, to go up the sides. Take our scissors, and that should give us the platform that the bacon beans can go onto. And the other way I'll show you in just a wee tick. So for our pastry, we're going to roll the pastry out. Again, it doesn't matter what you're rolling out, the rules are the same. What we want to try and avoid when rolling pastry is too much flour on the table. And the other thing you want to do is you want to try and get it in one go, because you don't want to have to scrape it all back up together and bring it back together, and then you get pastry that's overcooked. So it's important that you try and get it in one go. A little bit of flour, top and bottom, and you can still see those little flakes of butter, which is telling me that this pastry hasn't been overworked. We take a rolling pin, and just nice and gently, we just pin and turn. The rolling pin should only ever go backwards and forwards. It should never be side to side or back to front, because you end up with a big stuck piece of pastry. Always pin and turn. Just a little bit of time. Just push that out. Again, you can see the butter. And when you pin and turn, you know, you're getting to feel how thick the pastry is. You know it's not stuck, and you know when you need a little bit more flour. So just instinctively you feel it just catching a little bit on the table. Pin and turn, and you get it nice and even as well. So there we are. So our pastry has been pinned out. This is sometimes the difficult bit, to get the pastry onto the tartlet mould. I find the easiest way is just to pick it up with the rolling pin and just very gently just allow that just to fall into place. We then just very loosely drop the pastry into the mould or into the ring. I'm going to pinch a little bit of the pastry. And this here is going to be used to press the pastry into the mould. And just a little dab of flour. So some people will actually leave the overlap on and then bake, you know, what it is they're making, and then cut it off at the end. If you know that your pastry's not overworked, you can actually take it off at this stage, because when you overwork it, the pastry shrinks. And if you know it's not overworked, it isn't going to shrink. So I tend to take the overlap off at this stage before I actually push it all the way in or push it all the way up. And then just take my finger and just push in. And what it does, it actually pushes the pastry above the lip, and that allows you to get the pastry case really full. So if you're making a chocolate tart or lemon tart or frangipan or whatever the job is, or indeed if it's a savoury pastry, it's the exact same principle. So just pushing that up, nice and neat, making sure it's all in place, and that's our lined pastry tartlet. We then take our cartouche that we made earlier and we push that in, and then we take our baking beans. You have to be careful with your baking beans, because if you get any on the actual pastry, it can bake in and you end up with a really fiddly job of trying to get it out. And again, just a nice push in, and then from there you're looking again another half hour in the fridge. This will cook much better once the flour's been rested, the butter's set. Our our other way of lining it for blind baking is to use cling film. I'll just quickly show you that. And I actually prefer cling film because there's less risk of the baking beans contaminating the pastry. So we take about 3 sheets of cling film. Never do it with one because it always bursts. So 3 sheets of cling film, and then we can put our baking beans in, push it to the sides, and then all we do is we just bring the cling film up. And what actually happens when this goes in the oven, the cling film starts to contract, and it gives you a really good tight platform that holds pastry down. And the other good thing about doing it this way, you can actually reuse this. It will stay in the shape of your tartlet. So if you're making a lot of tartlets the same shape, it can be reused. So that's the sort of fundamentals of making sweet pastry, lining a tart, and showing a couple of different options of how to blind bake.